Unlike many ancient works, the New Testament was written primarily by eyewitnesses of the events described. These eyewitnesses included Matthew, Peter, Paul, John, Jude, and James. The inspired human authors of the New Testament either personally observed the resurrected Christ or had direct access to one who actually saw him. In relation to this, we must note Mark's Gospel is essentially a recording of the message he personally received from the Apostle Peter, while Luke, a contemporary of all the early apostles, composed the Gospel he was given by the Apostle Paul, his close traveling companion. Mark and Luke were also likely eyewitnesses to some of the events described in their Gospels. These facts are strongly affirmed by the early church in general, and specifically by several relatively early Christian authors, such as Irenaeus, Papias, Polycarp, Origen, Eusebius, Clement of Alexandria, Jerome, Tertullian, and others. For example, Irenaeus, pastor of the church in Lyons, reported near 180 AD that Matthew published his own gospel among the Hebrews in their own tongue when Peter and Paul were preaching the gospel in Rome and founding the church there. After their departure, Mark, the disciple and interpreter of Peter, himself handed down to us in writing the substance of Peter's preaching. Luke, the follower of Paul, set down in a book the gospel preached by his teacher. Then John, the disciple of the Lord, who also leaned on his breast, himself produced this gospel while he was living at Ephesus in Asia. As Peter proclaimed in 2 Peter 1:16, "We have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty." Multiple passages in Luke, John, Acts, 1 Corinthians, Galatians, Hebrews, 1 Peter, and 1 John also include explicit apostolic eyewitness claims, as well as confirmation of the New Testament writer's interest in historical accuracy. As one scholar remarked, what is needed to establish historical events is credible testimony that these particular events did indeed occur. The apostolic eyewitnesses have provided us with such credible testimony. Norman Geisler asserted, "The New Testament records are authentic first-century and first-hand information about the life, teachings, death, and resurrection of Christ." He continued, "Both the authenticity and the historicity of the New Testament documents are firmly established today. The authentic nature and vast amount of manuscript evidence is overwhelming compared to the classical texts from antiquity. Furthermore, many of the original manuscripts date from within 20 to 30 years of the events in Jesus' life, that is, from contemporaries and eyewitnesses." He concluded, "No event in the ancient world has more eyewitness verification than does the resurrection of Jesus." As Simon Greenleaf reasoned, "In the absence of circumstances which generate suspicion, every witness is to be presumed credible until the contrary is shown, the burden of impeaching his credibility lying on the objector. Every document, apparently ancient, coming from the proper repository or custody, and bearing on its face no evident marks of forgery, the law presumes to be genuine, and devolves on the opposing party the burden of proving it to be otherwise." Since most of the enemy eyewitnesses were still alive when the New Testament was being written and preached, making a false claim in their presence would have been fatal to Christianity. If the written and spoken declarations offered by the first Christians were not true, then at least some of Christ's bitter enemies would have made an attempt to expose the lies. If the resurrection really did not happen, then logic tells us we should possess at least one copy of an early enemy report which contradicts a multitude of independent gospel accounts, as well as the numerous non-biblical and secular sources which confirm many New Testament details, but there are none. As F. Bruce, professor of biblical criticism and exegesis at the University of Manchester in England, observed, "The disciples could not have afforded to risk inaccuracies which would at once be exposed by those who would only be too glad to do so. On the contrary, one of the strong points in the original apostolic preaching is a confident appeal to the knowledge of the hearers. They not only said, 'We are witnesses of these things,' but also, 'as you yourselves also know,' in Acts 2:22. Had there been any tendency to depart from the facts in any material respect, the presence of hostile witnesses in the audience would have served as a further corrective." Acts 2:32, 3:15, 26:26, and 1 Corinthians 15:3-8 are other examples of passages through which the apostles boldly appealed to the widespread knowledge of the public concerning Christ's crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. New Testament scholar Robert Grant of the University of Chicago concluded, "At the time the Gospels were written, there were eyewitnesses and their testimony was not disregarded. This means the Gospels must be regarded as largely reliable witnesses to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. If the resurrection news was really a legendary story, then Jesus' opponents would have certainly pounced at the chance to prove it was a lie." Impressively, none of the disciples' bold proclamations were ever disputed in the historical records. The silence of Jesus' ancient critics speaks loudly in favor of the resurrection's reality.